What's up, guys? Gons here for the Face Like the Sun YouTube channel. A big article on Huffington Post Science went viral last week by Jeff Schweitzer. Earth 2.0, bad news for God. And I'm sure you guys at least heard about it. It's been shared a bunch of times all over the internet. And basically, this guy's argument is that religions are in trouble. And obviously, when he says religions, he means Christianity, because this discovery of Earth 2.0 undermines all the Bible. And let me read a quick quote from this article that you can check out. It's a short article if you want to read it. I'll link to it and everything. He says, quote, "I would like to preempt what will certainly be a rewrite of history on the part of the world's major religions. I predict with great confidence that all will come out and say such a discovery is completely consistent with religious teachings. My goal here is to declare this is nonsense before it happens. I am not alone in this conclusion that religion will contort to accommodate a new reality of alien life." So basically what he is saying is that once Earth 2.0 is discovered, which they said it was, it's kind of the big hoopla from last week from Kepler. And actually I listened to the press conference and they were saying how they weren't sure how old the solar system was that they found it in. It was maybe 6 billion, give or take 2 billion years. So somewhere between 4 and 8 billion years old. And gosh, that doesn't sound very accurate. You know, you would think that in science, you have to be a little bit more accurate than that. But here we have these scientists are allowed to suggest that there is a 4 billion year window of the age of this alleged solar system, which kind of undermines this whole idea of how old the universe is or how old the Earth is. I mean, how can they be trusted to know how old anything is, right? So anyway, the point is they're suggesting that now that Earth 2.0 has been discovered, the next step will basically be alien life, and therefore the major religions, especially Christianity, will have to rewrite their Bible because they ignore the mention of aliens. Now, throughout this article, Schweitzer attacks one specific approach to the biblical narrative of creation. And it's the young Earth creation view. And the argument appears to make sense from the perspective of young Earth creation. But not only that, but just taking like certain passages in Genesis 1 and isolating them. You know, there are 66 books. And he makes a bold declaration here where he says, quote, "None of the 66 books of the Bible make any reference to life other than that created by God here on earth in that 6-day period." And I would beg to differ about that. The most basic example coming from Job 38:7, where it says, "When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy." And this in context is talking about God laying down the foundations of the earth and creating it and all this stuff. Basically, these heavenly hosts, the divine council, the angels, whatever you want to call them, were shouting for joy. They were celebrating the fact that God had created and fashioned the earth. So there you have it. That's one example that suggests that there are intelligent entities that exist that are not human, that appear to exist outside of the earth. And it could be in a physical sense or in a spiritual sense. I'd say spiritual mainly, but I'll get back to that thought in a moment here. Some friends of mine who are sort of heavy hitters in the realm of Bible prophecy and, you know, just some of my peers and friends commented on this, one being Chris Putnam. Chris Putnam said, quote, "While I don't see the arrival of benevolent space brothers anywhere in Bible prophecy, Scripture is silent as to whether God created life on other planets." This is accurate. God doesn't talk about aliens on other planets. Now, I have seen researchers, fellow Christians, who have used certain passages to argue that there are passages that suggest some sort of alien life on other planets, but they weren't necessarily the best arguments. I have also seen Christians pull out Bible verses to prove that, in fact, God says that there isn't life out there. And so there's no consensus there. But for the most part, I agree with Chris Putnam that the Bible is pretty much silent as to whether or not he created life on other planets. But before I move forward here, let me jump back to this quote. "None of the 66 books of the Bible make any reference to life other than that created by God here on earth in that 6-day period." Well, you have to understand that this author here is writing this article from a naturalist worldview. And obviously, when he says life, he's talking about biological life, specifically one that comes from Darwinian evolution and, the whole scientific paradigm that is pushed today. But if you look at the Bible, obviously there are intelligent life, if you want to call it that, maybe not biological on the onset, but certainly some sort of intelligent life forms that exist beyond humans. And I already gave you an example from the book of Job, but there's more. Now, in the book of Daniel, chapter 10, from verse 10 through 14, it talks about an angel coming and touching Daniel on the shoulder. He was sent by God, but he was delayed 21 days because he was battling the prince of the kingdom of Persia. And Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help him. Now, when it says prince here, it's not talking about just a normal prince. These are archangels, which are obviously spiritual entities. But it's interesting how he was physical in that he touched Daniel on the shoulder. So the point is that this statement here by Schweitzer is inaccurate when he says that none of the 66 books of the Bible make any reference to life other than that created by God here on earth in the 6-day period. Because obviously here they are, these intelligent entities. It's life, if you want to call it that. They are sentient entities, beings that exist in perhaps a parallel world or dimension. But in any case, again, when you are in naturalism, you don't see anything supernatural. You don't see any of the spiritual ramifications at all. So that already shows that he is dismissing that aspect of it. And, some people can take that and say that, these angels are just aliens. That's sort of the ancient astronaut theorists, what they claim, to be the case. But again, that relies on this idea of naturalism in the evolutionary sense of biological evolution. And that really doesn't answer any questions. It just pushes the question back one step. So that's one thing. And you also have several passages from the divine council concept that there are the heavenly host. And this is, again, similar to an archangel. I guess he's one of, this heavenly host that exists, the heavenly bureaucracy, if you will, and some of them rebelled. And they will die like men, which means that they have some sort of physicality. They will die. There is death that is assigned to them. That is according to Psalm 82. And if you want to learn more, you can learn more about the Divine Council from Dr. Mike Heiser's work. And speaking of Dr. Mike Heiser, Dr. Heiser also made a comment on this thread here, at least in the Facebook thread. And here's what he said. Quote, "It seems Mr. Schweitzer gets his biblical knowledge from young earth creationists and the King James Version. I've got a PhD in Hebrew Bible, so I know something about what he thinks the Bible says in this regard. Here are the facts. 1. The Bible makes no claim to be the center of the universe. The biblical writers didn't even know about anything like a universe, nor did they know about any scheme of celestial revolutions. You can't make claims about something you don't know exists. Only a handful of planets are mentioned by name in the Bible, and none of them are said to revolve around the earth. 2. Humans are not the only divine imagers. The plural language of Genesis 1:26 tells us quite clearly, in a biblical worldview, the members of the heavenly host, intelligent, non-human spirit beings that we like to think of as angels, also share in imaging their creator. 3. The days of Genesis 1-2 describe an ordering of matter that is already present in Genesis 1:1-3. Those who read the text in Hebrew know that Genesis 1:1-3 is not a linear sequence because of Hebrew syntax. Genesis 1:1 is either the equivalent of a chapter title, if considered an independent clause, or a dependent clause that describes the circumstance to the actual act of creation. Grammatically, Genesis 1:3, let there be light. Genesis 1:2 is known by all Hebrew grammarians as a parenthetical aside and dependent clause, also setting up Genesis 1:3. In short, you can have aeons of time and other material creation off Earth prior to the first act of reordering existing matter on Earth, behind Genesis 1:1-2. 4. 2 New Testament passages can, but of course don't have to, speak of the creation of other worlds. Hebrews 1:2 and 11:3. In both cases, the Greek word aeon is plural. English translations usually still translate the term world, which is possible, but so is worlds, plural. I could pick a few more things, but intelligent readers will get the idea. What Mr. Schweitzer sees as unambiguous is actually a flawed reading of the English Bible, filtered through fundamentalist concerns brought to the text, not what derives from the text itself. Being a credentialed scientist doesn't give one permission to read the text on an ancient document badly any more than it does a fundamentalist who thinks the apostles used the King James Version. Sanctified or scientific incompetence in reading the text is still incompetence. Whoa. Dr. Heiser going after several threads here, and he's known to do that. He's known to sort of kick over the hornet's nest. And he also added this comment: I should add that, again, contrary to Mr. Schweitzer, people who take the Bible as sacred have long had a positive view of the notion of other worlds and life on those worlds. The idea has only fallen out of favor since the late 19th century. It's also cartoonish to think that intelligent people presume that something can't be true unless the Bible talks about it. The Bible doesn't talk about toilet paper and microwave ovens, but I know of no religious person who denies they exist or has lost their faith over their existence. Schweitzer's assumptions are logically absurd. Whoa. Again, he goes after Schweitzer pretty heavily here, and that's coming from a biblical scholar, ancient Semitic language scholar, someone who has actually read and compared every single word in the King James Bible word for word. He made the backlinks for the Logos Bible software, all the references and everything. So he knows the Bible pretty well and even understands the sort of wiggle room of translations that exist within the practice of translation. And just so, if you're a KJV only person listening to this and you might freak out, Dr. Heiser does suggest that the King James Version is a pretty good and accurate translation overall, one of the better ones, he says, but the King James onlyism arguments are, he calls it dead on arrival, and I'll address that in another video because I tend to agree with his sentiments. And he also said that he will never trust the KJV in the book of Job because simply the translators at the time didn't have the resources that we do now with certain linguistic connections to how certain words were translated in that time. And, they were making guesses in the book of Job. So again, this is not a bash on KJV onlyism. The video is not about that. But in any case, I wanted to address this because I think a lot of people will easily take an article like this and say, see, the Bible's not true, blah, blah, blah. But it is really actually somewhat of a strawman argument that Schweitzer is creating. I guess it's not a strawman if you're a staunch young earth creationist. And, for me personally, I have gone back and forth on this issue. I have yet to really settle on one conclusion on this topic. I don't think it's a salvific issue. So it's a peripheral issue. I don't think you're, a heretic or, less of a Christian if you don't believe in young earth creationism and the way it's taught. I was definitely a creationist when I first started looking into this, but the more I looked, not because of science, but actually just because of the Bible, I tend to think that there was some sort of existence of reality. Whether it be strictly physical or not, I don't know, but I tend to think that it was actually a existence of intelligent entities running around doing stuff in this sort of ethereal space between matter and spirit. And what I mean by that is that intelligent entities, angelic entities of some sort that definitely existed. And of course, the thing is, most people just see either physical or non-physical. And, the more we start looking at stuff, I guess, in terms of where I'm at, the distinction between physical and non-physical is kind of waning. There is really no difference. It's more of a gray area for me. And obviously, if you're a Christian, you know that the spirit exists and the body exists at the same time. So both exist. And, so in that way, if angels exist and, these are spiritual beings in nature, but they can obviously have some sort of physical existence, whether or not they manifest in the way that we do, I don't know. But in any case, the point here is that this article here, don't be swayed by it. This is scientism, the religion of scientism, and I am calling it a religion, propaganda for that. And also it could be, potentially sort of a propaganda piece for the coming alien deception, whether that be, something that happens or not. It doesn't really matter because what they're doing is setting up the world to accept some sort of alien life form. And let me just distinguish something as well, since I'm on this topic. There is a distinction that can be made between intelligent life and just biological life, okay? Because, people have already found, allegedly, bacteria and things like that living in space. So that's, if you want to call it life, that's life in outer space. What they haven't found is sentient, intelligent entities to the degree that, we as humans are, or even, at the level of an animal. So, we haven't found anything like that, at least not yet. But, the hope of a lot of these folks is that that will happen. And, the hope of a lot of these folks also is that when that happens, all religions will fall apart. So, that's just my thoughts on it. Obviously, there's a lot more that could be said on this, and I'll give some links to some different resources in the description section. But I wanted to make this video because, I got some messages from people saying, kind of freaking out over it, and there's no need to freak out, because this is actually a very biased piece of literature here on Huffington Post Science. So, with that being said, hope you guys have an awesome day. God bless.